Good morning, members of the press. Thanks for coming to this biannual crime presentation, which I'll get started into right away. First, it's very encouraging to report that serious crime has decreased by roughly 26%. Also, burglary, which has been a very worrying crime for us, and I'll speak some more about that. We have seen a decrease of nearly 34% or 34%. Murder, also we have seen 100% decrease. Last reporting period, there were 2 murders. Pleased to report that this year we have not seen any murders, in particularly the gang killings that we have seen in the past. We have not seen any of that in the last reporting period. This is not to say that there are not still a problem with gangs and gang-related offenses, but from where we were coming from the last reporting period and the years before, as you know, when you had gang violence, we have seen a significant decrease. There was an increase of about 94 more crimes in the category of other crimes, or an increase of roughly 31%. Total crime increased by 10%. That is very discouraging, and I'll expand on that later. Also in the reporting period, there have been 9 firearms recovered, 8 of which were deemed firearms under the firearms law, and 1 an imitation firearm. It is also important to note that my officers have been working not only hard on the front line, but in many instances have put themselves at great risk and danger to remove firearms from the street. And there's an example that I'm extremely proud of, where one of the officers who initiated a search and recovery of a firearm, which was a 9mm loaded, outside of a nightclub, was one of our new probationer. He also is an unarmed officer. There's another incident which I would also want to highlight, and there are several others, but in the interest of time, I'll just highlight a few. Sergeant, who is also a frontline officer, who is not armed, led a response team to pursue a suspect who was believed to be armed with a firearm. The officers, the suspect eluded capture, but the officers did a search and recovered a large quantity of ganja. They had to knock off that night, but they remained to continue a pre-dawn search the following morning and recovered a firearm. They also had to return to work later that day. So I just want to dispel the myth that police officers are sitting down and not doing any work. And these are just some of the instances where our officers have gone and exercised extraordinary diligence and restraint. There, another incident that I viewed, which I will caveat my comments because it is still before the courts, or not before the courts. But in that incident that I've seen with my own eyes, I can tell you that probably in other circumstances or elsewhere, the officer would have used, confronted with a similar situation, would have used and most likely justified in using lethal force. And our officers have exercised extraordinary professionalism and restraint. And some of this is consistent with the training that they have provided and the fact that we operate within the rule of law. Not to suggest that elsewhere that's not the case, but it is important to make note of those instances. Moving on, also in the current reporting period, 13 persons were arrested for robbery, resulting in 9 being charged for actual robbery, and the others for offenses including handling stolen goods. As I said, I would say a little bit more about burglaries, that despite the fact that burglaries are down by 34%, there are still 212 victims of burglary. I understand how traumatic it is on victims of crime, especially when your homes have been invaded by a stranger. So I'm not going to minimize that, we get it. But I also want to note the fact that during this reporting period, we have arrested 25 persons for burglary-related offenses, 4 of which are repeat offenders. And in one instance, one of the offender was arrested 5 times. So the problem we're facing, and we see it, is a chronic recidivism amongst persons committing these offenses. And I say recidivism, these are persons who have been before the courts, have been convicted, in some cases received custodial sentences or probation, and have returned to commit crimes again and again. And I understand the public's concern, but I ask that it is balanced against the frustration that we have as police officers as well, because we see these people with a revolving door. And I've made a point in the Legislative Assembly recently, and Kurt, who is also an experienced detective, and we have dealt with many crimes in our career between the two of us. And in my days work in the streets, and I've arrested several persons, and it is sad to see that many of these individuals are still committing crimes. And as I've said, what is even more distressing to me is the fact that the kids of many of these young, well, they're no longer young men, adults, grown adults, are now committing crimes. So it's a generational problem. And until we address these issues, it cannot be a police problem alone, because it's not a police problem. It's a societal problem. It's a social problem. So until we combine our resources and our efforts to be brought to bear on the problem of addressing recidivism, many of them are substance abuse, and there must be proper treatment, and I'm sure there's a treatment facility, so I'm not throwing anyone under the bus. I'm not here to criticize my other colleagues, but I think there needs to be a national, not only consensus, but effort to address recidivism. Otherwise, we're going to continue the cycle. And how many times, I ask, are we expected, and we will, but how many times are we expected to arrest the same individuals? We arrest these individuals, and then they commit burglaries, and public quite rightly expect more of us, but we have to balance it against the fact that, and each time sometimes it's getting even harder to detect these crimes because they're becoming more and more used to the court system, the procedures, and they're finding ways to defeat those procedures and defeat the system. Moving on, I asked a question, or you'll ask a question, okay, what are we doing? Because, like I said, we get it. We know that there is a pervasive fear of crime and perception of crime. There are still 212 victims of burglaries, for example. So what are we doing? We get it. Telling people about the crime figures alone will not alleviate the concerns and the anxiety in the community. We are now waiting on the appointment of the next commissioner. So it could be easy for me to sit here and say, or use the cliche, it's business as usual. But business as usual is not good enough. So we have to get going, and we're moving on. So I'm going to tell you about some of the things that we've been doing. We have decided, I've already publicly explained through press releases, the new command structure that we have decided on because of some leadership gaps, just to ensure that we have a proper command, appropriate command structure that we can manage during the interim, but also ensure that we are persistent and relentless in our efforts to crack down on crime. So you know about the command structure. We have devised a two-pronged approach. One, we are going to continue a relentless crackdown on crime, particularly firearms, burglaries, and robberies. Secondly, we're going to revitalize, and we have started that, revitalizing our community policing initiative. We believe that the way for us to engage our community, to build partnerships, is through community policing strategy. And you can see elsewhere where law enforcement have been rethinking that, because it was something that was tried in the 90s, especially in the US and the United Kingdom. And we have tried it also in the 90s. And I guess with crime decreasing, people have become accustomed or comfortable with taking their foot off the pedal, so to speak, and you find yourself that you have become estranged from your community. And it is important, as I've said, that the police cannot do it alone. So hence the reason why we believe that we have to drive this conversation, drive this partnership through community policing, or neighborhood policing, as it is called elsewhere. Some of the things we've been doing, we have been holding forums with business communities, daytime and nighttime businesses. We have had those meetings at the Chamber of Commerce as well, and we have listened to their concerns. Superintendent Robert Graham is leading on that initiative, and they have met already, and they have responded to some of the concerns raised. And in fact, I'll report that, pleased to report that coming out of that meeting resulted in an arrest over the weekend of an individual. So it shows that we listen, we care, and we act. Apart from the business community, we have also had meetings with Youth Act, because we also want to look at how we can support interventions and programs with at-risk youth, but also divisionary programs during the long summer break when our young people are out of school. I'll say this, that I've been out there, my colleague have been out there on patrols at nights, not every night, but we try to get out there ever so often with our officers. And it's not unusual to see children as young as age 12 out in the streets, even up to 3 o'clock in the morning. And I'll borrow a quote that I've heard regularly in New York on one of the media houses, that asks the question, it's 11 o'clock, where are your kids? And probably at 3 o'clock, parents should be asking where are their kids. Parents need to impose proper, sensible curfew on their children. And children at age 12 shouldn't be out on the street. If you, children at 3 o'clock in the mornings and parents are home, that's a neglect. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a criminal offense, because you're neglecting your child and you're leaving them to the mercy of others to mold them into their own image, so to speak, and probably the image that you not wish to mold your kids in. So we have seen that as a problem as well. Young people out on the street late at nights and around nightclubs. Moving on, next week we hope to continue engaging the business community, and we also want to meet with the security companies, and we'll be having a meeting with security providers. We believe that there are several security companies out there, several officers working at nightclubs, working at different locations, and we want to build a partnership with our security companies, but also, more importantly, to leverage any opportunities where we can share or receive information, because there are highs and lows out there as well. And we want to explore opportunities how we can work together, because I believe they are part of the extended law enforcement family, so to speak. There are eyes and ears, so we want to ensure that we can leverage and see how we can better work together. But I'll say this as well, that we'll be calling upon the security providers to ensure that they have proper industry standards for the occupation of security officers. We don't want to become the regulatory body for them. We don't propose to regulate an industry. This is private enterprise, and I understand the sentiments where people are reluctant to be regulated, especially by government agencies. But I think certain industry, it's a growing industry, and there's a need to have proper standards, and we're willing to work with them to ensure that these standards are put in place. I know that many of them do hire ex-law enforcement officers and military officers. So again, they come with certain skills and experience that I believe can also benefit us as we try to work to create a safer environment for people to live, work, and go out and have entertainment and visitors to visit our islands. So these are some of the things that we'll be doing. I should say, though, that I believe, and not necessarily I, because it's a collective effort, consensus within the command team, that the licensing of security officers is another area that we could look at to devolve into another government entity, thus freeing up police resources. And when Mr. Walton speaks later, you'll probably see that there are certain things that we're doing that police officers shouldn't be doing. And the basic question to ask is, does it require police power? If it doesn't, then it's something that can be considered for outsourcing or given to someone else, because we need to ensure that we have police officers out on the street dealing with the problems that they are trained and best suited to do. In addition to that, continuing our community policing strategy, we have a mobile command vehicle, and that has been sitting there for quite some time. We have decided to brush the dust off of it, so to speak, and we have redeployed it, and we'll be redeploying it on a scheduled basis. We'll be putting it in certain hotspot areas and where we believe that we can actually bring policing to the community, because the basic tenet of community policing is decentralizing policing, personalizing policing. And just last week, the vehicle was deployed to Prospect, and I must commend the residents of Prospect who have organized themselves as neighbors looking after neighbors, and they have reached out to us, and we have gone and met with them, and in response to their concerns, we have placed the mobile command vehicle there, and we have increased certain visibility of policing, and at the same time continuing the discussion around how we can help them to keep their communities safe, because that's about community policing as well. Working problem solving with residents, with businesses, to see how we can make these communities, make these places safer for all. So that is something that we're doing. We used to have our bicycle patrols. Again, we have decided and we've said we want to redeploy our bicycle patrols. We want to get officers out, very visible, out in the streets, out in the town center, out in the communities where a car is probably not as visible in terms of seeing officers, because people want to see their police officers almost up close and personal. So we want to bring back the bicycle patrols, and that's something that we hope to implement very soon. We still have the bicycles, and that we pleased to find that they were still in good condition. Very industrious officers who was part of the bicycle program have, over the years, taken care of the bikes and ensuring that they are properly serviced. And again, it shows that there are officers within the organization who take pride in the assets that we have. Another important matter for us and the country is the inspection next year of the Financial Action Task Force. So that is something that we are also involved in. It's a national imperative, but we also have a very important role to play in the inspection that will take place next year. The Cayman Islands have worked hard to ensure that we have a first-class financial center, but also a very robust regulatory regime. And as a law enforcement officer, I challenge anyone to say that Cayman is not a place that is properly regulated. I know it's easier to open a bank account in the US than it is to open a bank account in the Cayman Islands. And I've done that, tried to open a bank account in the Cayman Islands, and the things that I had to do to open an account compared to have to open an account in the US already, and the ease with which you can open an account. It's just mind-boggling. But I know that, there's still that perception, just like we have the perception here about crime, there's this perception out there, the lingering perception that the Cayman is a place, a rogue territory, which it is not. So I want to add my voice to the many voices that is above my pay grade, but as someone within the law enforcement community and one of its leaders, to say that we believe that we know we have a strong, robust regulatory regime, and we investigate any offenses that might involve corruption, laundering of money. And we are part of that inspection regime, so it's a lot of work to do, and this is not something that can sit back and wait for the next commissioner of police. So that work is ongoing. The Attorney General and the Ministry of Commerce, they are leading on the initiative, but we are involved, and it's for example, weekly meetings are taking place, so there's a lot of work to be done, and we have people that are tasked with that. Again, turning to the appointment of the next commissioner, one of the requirements that I've heard of, a requirement or of his new responsibility, or of his responsibilities when he's appointed, is a review of the organization. But we also believe that there's an urgency. As we said, we can't sit back and it's business as usual. So we have to get on with the job. So we have started an internal review as well, hopefully to give him or her a head start when that person is appointed. And I can tell you some exciting things are taking place. Yes, there might be some resistance to change in certain areas, but we have to look at areas to continually improve to ensure we're delivering a first-class service. And we're trying to do the best job we can. So we have started that internal review. Next week, we'll be visiting the sister islands, because we are not just Grand Cayman, but 3 islands under one nation, one country. So we'll be visiting the sister islands. We know that the public there have some concerns, so we hope to meet with the community, have a public meeting, meet with community representatives, but also meet with our staff. We have held a staff meeting just recently with our staff here in Grand Cayman, although we extended an invitation to the officer in charge so that she could come over, but she was on vacation. So we're going to go over and meet with our staff so we can explain to them exactly what is going on, although they know that through our internal communication processes, but we're going to go and meet with our staff. On the issue of staffing, I just want to say that as at the 30th of June, we have 366 police officers. So just want to clarify a myth that we have 500 police officers. There are currently 366 police officers. We have funding for 24 additional posts. Next year, January 9th, we hope to start our first recruit class if our next recruit campaign is successful as the last 2. So we'll be launching a recruitment campaign shortly with a hope to start training on the 9th of January. It's important that we are now 45% local officers in the organization, and we must make an investment in the future officers. So there's also an urgency for that, but there is also an urgency to fill other critical posts. So we'll be continuing that process as well, because what we would like to see, especially with our officers on the front line, we do have a number of experienced officers on the front line, but to bring in more experienced officers, not only to work in some of those critical areas, but to ensure that we can have proper mentoring for young officers As I said, I'm proud of the job they're doing. I just mentioned the case, and I could mention several more cases where the first class of local officers and the second class have done some extraordinary and tremendous work. In fact, two of the officers in the first class were selected to undertake the high potential development scheme as Inspector Leo Anglin did when he successfully completed his training, and he's now an inspector, and a fine example of the product from that program. So we have two officers who have been identified, and I'm also pleased to say one is a female, and they'll start the program shortly. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, that's my presentation to you. I now hand you over to my colleague, Chief Superintendent Walton, soon to be Deputy Commissioner of Police, and wish to probably use this opportunity to publicly congratulate him on his appointment. And I know that we look forward to working together as the next two Deputy Commissioners and take the police force to a place where we believe that we want to move it, and then hopefully working along with the next commissioner to move forward so that Cayman Islands can remain a safe place to live, work, and visit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ennis. I was wondering, with everything that has been said by Mr. Ennis, what else I could add, but I think I would just like to expand on, besides the crime statistics, and just expand on some of the workload that our officers are involved in on a daily basis. So, for instance, you will all have perhaps seen the crime stats by now. So you're looking at over 1,700 crimes reported to us thus far for the year. That's really only a percentage of what we do daily. In fact, what I would say, based on our number of calls for services, we respond to 2,300 calls for services per month. Those calls can range from civil disputes, where you have landlord and tenant disputes, and we attend to prevent breaches of the peace. It can range from domestic disturbances, from alarms, and the like. So the 1,700 crimes out of that totality is a representation of the crimes that are actually under investigation. On average, we respond to roughly around 28,000 calls for service per annum, and that's the figure since. And we get these figures because that's all captured in a single database by the Emergency 911 Center. So we have a very good system in capturing all of that, what we do. And we started this process back in 2012. So we were able to say exactly what is it that we're doing on a daily basis. Because prior to 2012, we weren't exactly sure how much we were doing. But certainly definitively, I can say now our officers are responding to about 28,000 calls for service per year, or an average of 2,350 per month. In addition to that, officers generated work, so self-initiative. We average about 5,500 per annum as well. So in addition to the 28,000 calls, officers are doing self-generated work. So that simply means stop a vehicle looking at traffic violations, or persons who may be acting suspicious whilst they're on patrol in a particular patrol zone, so to speak, or the Marine on doing stops of vessels at sea that may simply mean a stop to see if they have the relevant safety equipment. So in totality, just looking at the actual workload that we deal with on a daily basis, as which is not just only looking at the investigation of crimes. In addition to this, we have, we have and Mr. Ennis mentioned earlier about looking at reducing some of our demands. We have demands on us, on the organization, that has really been placed on us since 1975. Legislation such as the Criminal Procedure Code, which calls specifically that only police officers can serve summons, witness summons. Only the police can serve witness summons. That is a 1975 law that has been reviewed over and over and has never changed. That simply means that every witness summons the DOE need, because of cases that they may have brought before the court for prosecutions, marine offense prosecutions, but they need witnesses, we serve those summons. It means that every custom case that they bring before the court and they need witnesses, summons before the court, we serve those summons. Immigration need witnesses, that simply means we serve those summons. So, and this goes across it could be the Central Planning Authority if they brought a criminal offense before the court, we serve the summons. So, on average, we are receiving about 9,000 plus summons per year. 9,000. That works out to about 173 summons per week, or 692 per month, of which we have 4 officers in that one department. Now, we've recognized this, so we're not just sitting and say, well, what are we going to do about this? Because there is a solution. And the solution is simply review that legislation. And there's no reason why that has to remain in place. That was okay in 1975 when maybe you had 20 witnesses for the year. Maybe. I don't know. I was very young at that time. But in today's world, that's obviously changed, because we're now saying 9,000 a year. So we certainly will be looking at that and making certain recommendations to the Attorney General's office or the Solicitor General's office, looking at the relevant legislation to see if we can outsource that sort of that demand and reduce the demand on us. So there's no reason why that particular service cannot be outsourced, because you don't need a warrant card. In other words, you don't need to necessarily be a police officer to serve a summons, but you do need to be a police officer now, because the law says it must be a police officer. So there has to be some changes there, and that's just some of the stuff that we do on a daily basis. I'm expecting a query about warrants, but that's another issue that we have. Now, that is probably for us unavoidable, because you do need a warrant card to execute a warrant. But it's not about the fact that it requires a warrant card or the demand is there. The issue is it's the constant demand that is coming in daily to us. We, on average, are receiving 12 to 15 warrants per day from the court. 12 to 15 per day. We have over 800 outstanding, but we're executing 12 to 15 a day, and we're taking in 15. As you can see, we'll never bring that number down. So we try to prioritize, obviously, those that are critical and need to be dealt with on a priority basis. Most of these, 90% of these, are all failure to appear. So persons who have, mostly defendants, who have been summons via defendant summons or bailed to appear in court, failed to appear. I know that there has been a review of the entire system with the Clear Veteran Report. So that is still, I know, under review as to the recommendations there. In addition to the call for service, I just want to make it clear, because I think there's a perception that we show up, and I'm hoping I'm wrong here, but there's a perception that we show up and we put the bad guys in the back of the police car, put the cuffs on, drive away, and it's over. In fact, the work has just begun. And I can cite certainly 2 examples. I won't name the cases. I can cite 2 examples where I know, because I've been in those major incident inquiries, where right now we're running a major incident inquiry where we've got 600 documents that has been generated as a result of that one call for service. 600 documents. That in itself has taken near 4 detectives to just work on that one case. So another case, we have generated over 200 documents. And when I say documents, actions that in terms of lines of inquiries that need to be completed to complete the case. So we just don't turn up, put the cuffs on, and walk away. It's not over. In fact, the work has just begun. So I wanted to clear that up because it's been said, I've read it on in previous, whether it's on blog sites or media responses in terms of, well, you've had 1,700 reports, you've got 366 police officers. You take that and you divide that, and that's, what the numbers are. I can't calculate the exact number in my head right now, but give and take, maybe 3 per person. It don't work that way. So we cannot gauge what we do based on simple calculations as that. And in addition, I know Mr. Ennis mentioned about the 366 police officers, We have to recognize that out of that, we've got 30 auxiliary constables that are providing essential services that must occur at this point. For instance, jailers, we've got 12 officers who are our auxiliary constables who are performing jailer duties. So in our detention center, that's a 24-hour demand that must be done because obviously we've got our detention center and human rights. We must have those officers there. We provide security services for the court. We provide security services for the governor's residence. Those are all being provided by police officers. So when I hear, why don't we have 306 police officers in on the street tonight, we need to appreciate some of the other demands that these are demands that must be done on a daily basis, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. That is, there are no exceptions to that. We also, in terms of looking at reducing demand and some of the services we provide, Mr. Ennis mentioned it as well, about the security licensing services that we provide. We have over 600 security guards that are on island, 600 security guards. We need to provide services to that because the police at the moment regulate that. So we have officers looking into that. 3 officers are dedicated to that, along with two support staff. So that, that's added demand. And let's don't talk about our civilian support staff, because I cannot forget our civilian support staff, because they are doing an extraordinary amount of work for us. Every single arrest, a civilian support staff is involved because the law requires that there must be a transcript. We are now recording, so it's all recorded. Those civilian support staff need to get that transcript ready for court. That's added demand there for our support staff, and I can't sing enough praises for the work that they do for us in the background, and the analysis around crime, and the amount of work we do within looking at crime stats and crime analysis. And importantly, every call that comes in to us is answered by a civilian support staff, and they manage the call taking, the call receipt, the walk-ins at the police stations, and they manage all of that for us, and they are inputting all of this into the system. And that is a huge workload. So if you think about it, as I've mentioned, 28,000 called for service per year, plus the 5,000 self-generated officers initiatives that they do, that's all being inputted by civilian support staff on our system. So there's a lot of work that go on outside of just the regular show up, put the cuffs on, and leave. That's far from the truth. The work has just started. I think certainly from a call for service, that is probably as I could go on discussing as I could speak on this all day, but I think I've made my point and I've got my point across. So I think at this point I can leave it open for the media if you have any questions.
Okay, thanks.
Andrew Harris with Cayman 27. Either the two could answer. The first question, just Deputy Commissioner, NSU said that you have 366 police officers and you currently have 24 a post for 24 additional officers. Now, I remember when Commissioner Baines, he said maybe a year ago or thereabouts, said that after taking on new staff, they still had the capacity for additional staff, but they were putting that off so that they could give a well-deserved pay rise to officers. And taking on these new officers, are you then going to take back that rise, or do you still have vacancies that will allow for them to maintain this rise or maintain the pay?
As I mentioned earlier, that 26 of the vacant posts are funded, thus meaning that the others are not funded. So those that are not funded, meaning managed vacancies, those are the ones that are to continue to fund the pay rise. So the vacant posts that I'm talking about, those are through natural attrition. So by the end of the year, I suspect we're going to have even further attrition because next month we're losing at least 2 officers, 1 a sergeant. So that will create almost 2 posts right there. So these are through natural attrition.
Okay. My next question here is, you said that you guys wanted to take back take a fresh look at community policing. How exactly do you expect to, or what exactly are you expecting to implement to get this community policing off the ground? And a second question as well, by mobilizing or releasing your mobile command unit, is this the beginning of the militarization of the Cayman Islands police, like what we're seeing in the U.S. with their heavily militarized police and their mobile command zones, or are we far from there?
Okay. Okay, I think I could take them in any order, but the first question you asked was to do with community policing. Well, let me say community policing, the basic definition of community policing is that it's a philosophy and an organizational strategy, okay? A philosophy, one, that you have to have a buy-in, or not necessarily just a buy-in, but all officers, it's like a corporate culture, okay? So all police officers must understand that this is the philosophy driving the organization, okay? Secondly, it's an organizational strategy, like any other strategy, right? So you're implementing a strategy, okay? And under that, you have different actions that you would also use to employ your community policing strategy. It is basically also, as I said, decentralizing policing, okay? Taking policing to the community. So rather than driving around in a car or you're waiting for a response, okay? Because what you see happening, for example, in the US, right? And let's just use the last example of Dallas, because we're in some way a microcosm of the US, okay? Even although we're proud of our British overseas status, okay? But because of the close relationships with the US as well and traveling, people talk about dual citizenships and all of that. We tend to mirror what happened in the US and we watch the American television, okay? In Dallas was able, through their community policing initiative, to reduce the use of excessive force by probably almost 80%, okay? The relationship between the police and the community has significantly improved. Hence the reason why you could see the support, the outpouring of support to the Dallas police. Okay? Dallas police is now a model that other police services are looking at. Right? The same thing in Boston. Okay, I talk about recently when I met with the Rotary. Okay, gave an example that's happening in Boston. People are actually using military strategy that was developed to deal with problems in Afghanistan and Iraq. In taking back some of these villages, you go to the village leaders. All right, you develop relationships with the village leaders, and that's how you also gather intelligence. Okay, because you don't drop a drone by just out of the sky. You must know where you're dropping the drone, and you only know where to drop the drone by human intelligence. So we can't discount human intelligence, and you get that through relationships with your community. In Boston, where they have used the counter-insurgency strategy to model it in a community policing strategy, they have seen where, for example, gangs, those people who would never report things to the police are now reporting things to the police. Okay, there was a famous case in New York, right? And you know, kind of get me in a soapbox here because it's a passion I have, okay, and I know it works, okay. In New York, you have a woman who was mugged, stabbed, and beaten, okay, to death. And I think she was also raped, all right. Famous Genovese case. There were 38 people living in that apartment complex. She was screaming for almost half an hour, okay? And not one person called the police. When the reporter went and interviewed the residents, they said that they didn't feel like they trust the police, that they could call the police. So this is community policing, okay? It's about working closer with your community, developing relationships with your community. Now, sure, I probably exhausted that one. The mobile command vehicle, good question, but maybe the term conjure up what do you think as the militarization, or you suggest as the militarization as a police service. Far from the truth, okay? It's a very user-friendly vehicle, okay? So maybe the term, like I said, conjure up something. I could just say a mobile vehicle. But what it is almost like an office. If you haven't seen it, we're welcome to show it to you, okay? But you can park it, and we have used it, for example, when we have events out at Cayman during the camping. Open it, it has, all right, take for example, these mobile food vans, and so you can walk up to it, and it has a counter and all that. It's exactly what it is like, okay? And they can have places where someone can come in and sit and even take a statement. So it's like taking the police station out to the community, but it's not militarizing the police service.
It's like a mobile police station, as opposed to, so the police station, we're bringing the police station to you. So I think the term command center can probably get hyped too much. So it's really a mobile police station. You know, the same where you would walk into a police station is the same idea.
And that would be a contradiction of our community policing strategy, okay?
Good morning, gentlemen. Just a couple of questions. Following up, I remember the mobile police unit when you got it. I think it was at Net News then, and the photographs. Why was it shelved? Like, why were the bicycle police? Because I remember they were around about the same times. The cops on bikes, the mobile police unit, the neglect of community policing. Why did this all stop? So that's my first question. The second question is regarding the warrants. We got statistics yesterday. I think Peter Pollock had done an FOI request, and they're saying there's over 1,000 criminal and traffic warrants plus another 370 some fines, unpaid fines warrants. So that's like, you said 800, but I think it's close to 1,300.
I said well over 800.
Yeah, well, so that you would agree that it could be that those figures.
I agree. It could be, yes.
Have you made any, like you say, you're talking about certainly trying to get the witness summons issue being addressed. Obviously, you need a warrant card for a warrant, but is there some way that you could? Because a lot of people think that most of those, as you say, are probably not valid anymore. Many of them are probably overseas, especially traffic. They're overseas people. Is anybody talking about, not you guys, but like the courts doing a review so that they can say to you, actually, 600 of these are long gone? they're old, they've been, you know, we're not going to extradite somebody for a speeding ticket. So is anybody taking that responsibility, or have you asked for that to happen? And that's my questions. Thank you.
Well, certainly we have. We've been in discussions with the court administrative staff about it. I think the challenge we have, as you've mentioned about whether or not you can say, well, someone is overseas, so let's just forget about the warrant. It don't work that way, unfortunately, because a warrant has not been exhausted until it's actually been executed, and that there's legislation that says that. So until that, there has to be a review around the legislation and look at that aspect of it. But we have been in discussion with the court administrative staff, primarily around the looking at how we can make the development around that and streamlining that and making it more efficient than what it is currently. Admittedly, I'll tell you right now, it's not as efficient as it should be. But, you know, someone fails to appear in court, a warrant is issued, it's sent to us, it's our job then to execute it. And that's what we do. We are enforcers of the law, and that's simply it. You know, the methodology around that's outside of our remit. However, we're in discussions to see how we can improve upon that.
Good morning, Reshma Raghunath.
I think there's
Excuse me, that's my fault. Where's the second? The first question.
I thought she was going to give me a pass on that one, Wendy. Regarding community policing and the mobile vehicle, it's probably difficult for me to answer because, you know, leaderships have different priorities, and I'm not trying to throw any previous leaders under the bus either, because we're all part of the command team. So whatever decision is made, I'm part of the decision as well. But as I've said earlier, not just here in Cayman, but elsewhere, once, you know, crime started to go down, it's like a company. If you're having financial problems in the company, the first place people look to cut is training, the training budget, when probably you need more training in order to retrain people so they can respond to the challenges of the company that the company has been faced with. So it's probably not dissimilar in law enforcement that, okay, crime is going down. And I guess also with, although it didn't affect us that much here, but it's something that we're aware of, terrorism, that has really become at the forefront. And that's why you probably see the militarization of some police services in the U.S. as well. So people tend to take their foot off the pedal. But I believe that whatever we're doing, if it's working, we need to keep our foot on the pedal. Because the moment we take our foot off the pedal, that's when we start to have problems. So it must be sustained. And in fact, that's a good question that came from one of the residents in Prospect. That she sent to us. She said, you know, congratulated us on really responding to the needs of the community, but she wanted to know if these were going to be continued. And it's a good question, and I agree. We must sustain these programs, and it is just something that is not just unique to the Cayman Islands or to policing or the culture. You know, it's all over the world. You know, people just tend to, once they achieve success, they take their foot off the pedal and they look to move to something else, which or prioritize. So that's my best answer for that, my best guess. I'll just say something about the warrants, though, even though Kurt, you know, I must say, I've really articulated quite eloquently about the warrants and other issues, and just give me a sense of pride and confidence that, you know, we both understand the issues together and can support each other on different subject areas. But on the warrants, and again, I'm going to, because I don't want this to become the leading story, please, but I just want to preface my comments because I'm careful, and I'm sure you are, of being accused of criticizing the judiciary, because this is not a criticism of the judiciary. But I was working out there as an operational officer, and you go and you arrest somebody in a warrant, but very rarely, and you're in the courts a lot too, Wendy, do you see any consequences, any sanctions for failing to appear in court? So maybe there need to be some consequences, some sanction, because people will just, play fast and loose with the law, and you have to respect the judiciary. A police officer doesn't appear in court, and I've seen them issue a warrant for the police officer, and I support that. We take that as a serious offense, a dereliction of your duty. So when someone does not appear in court and a warrant is issued for that person arrest, and you have to go through all this effort to get that person and bring them in, and sometimes putting yourself at risk and at danger, the officers, there must be consequences. They shouldn't be probably allowed to get bail, or there should be a fine, or it should be taken into account if they are found guilty. That's for the judiciary, but all I say is that there needs to be some kind of regime whereby people know that there's consequences for failing to appear in court.
Okay, Reshma, you want to? Yeah, please do. Identify yourself.
Okay. Good morning, Reshma Raghunath, Cayman reporter. You talked about restarting the bicycle patrols. Do you have additional staff for this? Are you envisioning that, or are you going to be pulling from the current quota of staff? And my second question, you talked about chronic recidivism. How is that going to factor in with the conditional release law that is now active and your shortage of staff? How are you going to manage all these balancing factors?
Yeah, two good questions, thank you. And help me, if I go off track with your question. The last one was about the recidivism, and your first question again was bicycle patrols. Well, I know Mr. Walden referenced my 366 officers. I guess probably not to dispute the figures, but the point I really want to make is that, that in the past, we the figure that has been thrown out there is 450 odd police officers. So I just wanted to make it clear that it's not 400 and odd police officers. That might include support staff as well. The actual, that's why I said 3. So Mr. Walton would have said earlier probably, you have 400 and odd officers, so to speak. But when you start to break down the numbers, and you look at the workload, but it's actually 366 officers, and he has made that point, but I just want to, reinforce that again. It's 366 officers. Now, I don't believe we need to grow the police service. That's my view. I believe what we have, including those unfunded posts, okay, that I think we have sufficient personnel to get the job done. If we can do some of the things that Mr. Walton quite rightly alluded to, if we can get rid of a lot of the things that do not require a police officer to do. And he talked about the witnesses, serving witnesses, witness summonses, sorry. Because again, you amend the law, you could give that to the prison director, and he could serve summonses on his staff, the chief immigration officer. You get a security guard to accompany to serve summonses, and you pay them by a quota. It costs much less than hiring a police officer to do. So if you take those responsibilities and you look at other areas where you can outsource or civilize these responsibilities that police officers are doing, and we started that process in the 90s to good effect, because I give you an example. The licensing department was once under the police. It was a superintendent who was in charge of the vehicle licensing department. We did an internal review when there was this impetus being on reinvented government, okay? And we did an internal review and decided that this is not something for the police to do, and was agreed to transfer it, okay? And that freed up police resources. So we need to look at areas where we can continue to not only civilize the responsibilities, but transfer those responsibilities elsewhere. And your next question was about? Yeah. Well, again, that is going to be a collaboration of the different departments, because it can't rest again to the police to deal with managing the changes that will come under that law. There's a department that is for that, but we also have a working group that will also look to see how we can manage recidivism. But again, that should not really be the focus of the police, but we want to support programs because we would like to see how we can break that chronic recidivism rate that is taking place, and we believe it's also substance abuse. Many of the persons who are involved in committing burglaries, for example, have a substance abuse problem. Now, we're not trained people to deal with substance abuse, so there's nothing much we can do about it other than we can, through training, identify people who might have a substance abuse problem, especially when they're arrested and being interviewed, and see how we can help direct them to the right place to get proper treatment. Does that answer your question? Oh, the bicycle patrol. Well, okay. Well, as I was saying, is that I don't believe that we need to grow the organization. Okay. We can look internally, but we need to fill some of these vacant posts that we have to ensure that, okay, we have sufficient staff. But it is not about, okay, that we're going to grow beyond what we have. So, but it's a good question. But it is something that we will see how we can use existing resources. We won't be able to have probably the full deployment of what we want to have, but we probably start in a phase implementation process. Well,
Is that still under, like you said, under review? How much you're going to?
well, we have the bikes. We need to have the kit for the officers because they wear a special kit because, you know, given our climate here and all that, you know, so they have to have suitable kit. I don't want to give you a number now. It's a task I've given to the superintendent, so he'll come back and he'll make a proper assessment and decision of the implementation. The mobile vehicle was an easy one. The vehicle was there, and he had the staff, and he got it done. But I'm sure he'll get it done because he has to get it done.
Going to try to keep this to 4 questions.
My goodness.
The first one on robberies.
Yeah.
The gentleman, we have it looks like an increase from 13 to 21, if I'm reading that right. What do you attribute that to? Is that mostly individuals being robbed on the street? Is that business robberies? Do we know? And why do you think there's been an increase?
You want to take that?
Well, I think the reality is that we have a number of those are what I would consider what we would term as you got street robberies, so where someone has been mugged, so to speak. But we have had of those. We do have the commercial type robbery where someone was, a store has been robbed. For instance, we had one store and 2 stores in West Bay, for instance, were robbed by the same individual. That individual is now charged for 2 counts of robbery and before the court. So you have that street type robbery, which is the individual on the street who has been mugged, or we've had the commercial side in terms of looking at mini markets or gas stations, that sort of level.
Most of them are the individual robberies?
Yes, the vast majority would be pedestrian robbers.
Okay. Second question, Mr. Walton. I think you and I have talked about this a couple of times, but on the drugs and firearms offenses, total went way up, and the drugs offenses went kind of significantly down. I think you would say that the firearm number is actually good news, and the drugs offenses is bad news. But am I right about that? And if I am, why am I?
Well, I think you're correct because you're looking at the numbers. Let's look at drugs arrest, for instance, 82 compared to 113. In essence, that's bad.
We have less drug dealers now?
I would say no. So that's not good news because it means we've actually had less arrest there. But what I want to make my point here is that our focus is more on the dealers, the suppliers, and the importers. And if you've looked over the previous 6 months, you would have seen importers being arrested. You know, since November, we had some really big jobs. The Marine and our Drugs and Serious Crime Task Force had been focused on. So whilst that may be down to 82, that's because, you know, one vessel, for instance, has 400, 500, 600 pounds of cannabis on it. You may well have had an arrest of 2 persons or 3 persons, but look at the significance of that one case. So I think what is important is the focus, what the focus is on, and that focus is on the suppliers and the drug dealers. I'm sure you've all been keeping abreast on recent drug cases in terms of conspiracy. So we're looking at the higher level type of offenses, so to speak, because should we be focused on low level individuals who are perhaps have a drug addiction and bringing individuals in for suspicion of consumption? Not saying that we're not doing it, because we still do it. But is that really the focus, or should that be a health issue that should be driven by look at preventative measures to stop people from, in particular, it really hurts me when I see young people nowadays thinking it's acceptable to be high on marijuana all day. Because to me, I don't know where your future stand when we've reached that level. But from a policing perspective, in terms of enforcement, that has been our focus. So that's why those numbers are down, and it's been driven by looking at the higher level of individuals.
And just similarly, you'd argue perhaps that the firearms offenses going up, should people feel safer? Because people might think, whoa, look at all these guns they're finding, or imitation firearms.
Well, spot on, because we have been focused. We changed how we were doing business in the beginning of January this year, and we recognized that we do have a certain element of society that has an appetite for firearms. Our priority should be focusing on those individuals and bringing them to justice. We have been very proactive in taking that forward and driving that forward, and to the point where we're recovering 2 firearms per month. That says a lot. We weren't seeing that previously, and that's because of how we're conducting business now, and as regards to our firearms deployment island-wide. So that's a good thing in terms of the arrests.
Just 2 more. Briefly, okay, Mr. Walton, you said that 2 areas. The serving of court summonses for witnesses, and also the security licensing.
Yeah.
We can't really outsource the warrant service, because that has to be done by a police officer because of safety issues and so forth. What else? Other than those areas that you've already mentioned, what else could the police hive off to other departments?
In terms of reducing demand?
Yeah, just give me what in your perfect world, what could you get rid of?
I would get rid of probably half of the MVAs in this country. We deal with 2,500 road traffic collisions every year, and I think a lot of those we have to attend and have to investigate where you have injury, obviously, where individuals have been injured and in the hospital. There's an expectation that there is a police investigation, and that individual or offending party is brought, answers to the court and in terms of what has taken place. What I think we need to look at is review of that and say, okay, where we have, and we do, depending on the circumstances, because the law does say 2 vehicles. If it's minor damages, the police don't necessarily need to attend. That can be settled between parties, but we still attend where we have major damages because the 2 parties aren't agreeing who's at fault, so to speak. We are seeing tons of those. My view is the insurance companies, legislation would have to change, but the insurance companies throughout the world look at some of those type of incidents, and they have their own accident investigators that would respond to those sort of incidents. But it has to be very specific on that road traffic collision, and damages only. Obviously, injuries we would respond. Also, we are doing an extraordinary amount of work in our intelligence unit doing vetting. We vet for every single government department, every single ministry. There's an application to join the customs, application to join immigration, application to join the DOE. We vet all of that because there's no one else to do it. All of that has to be vetted by our staff within there. And that's a lot of work, can I tell you? So there are a lot of ways that we can look to reduce demand, because do we really want staff in a back room 5 days a week, or do we actually want to try to put more staff on the front line where you and members of the public can actually see them?
And one point I would just, Brent, if you don't mind, I would just probably add something else to what Mr. Walton mentioned about the accidents. Because even although if there are injuries, the law said it has to be investigated. But how often are you traveling on the street and you come up on a fender bender and it's blocking up traffic, and they're calling the police and they're waiting for the police to come? So some of these, and most times it's just for insurance purposes. And they also request a report from us, which we have to go and also provide a report. They also have to do an investigation, file the report, and then generate a report for the insurers. Some of these things are just for insurance purposes. So why should the police come? They should settle the matter at the scene, exchange information, and the law provides for that, and get the car out the way. And so that it can free up traffic, rather than people are stuck in traffic with just a mine, and then an officer has to be diverted from probably going to a more serious incident, or being somewhere where he could be deterring crime, to go and attend to a minor accident. So again, these are some of the things that we could free up. Let's mention also that in our scenes of crime unit, we had started the civilization of that, and we have achieved that now to 100%. Because the tendency in the Caribbean is that scenes of crime officers were actually police officers. And we had that vestige from the colonial past of officers, or trained police officers working as scenes of crime officers. So now we have people who are civilian, who are hired as scenes of crime officers, scenes of crime investigators, and we just also had the success of Brittany, a young Caymanian who has a tertiary degree in forensics, and she came on board, and we also provided her with on-the-job training. So now with the last officer we had, we're able to redeploy him somewhere else where where there was a need. So rather than we have to actually hire someone, we were able to redeploy him. So again, we have to look for areas where we can civilize certain services or outsource certain services.
And just to add as well, because this is a subject in terms of reducing demand and actually doing what we should be doing, we have 2 police officers that are dedicated to the schools, sitting in the schools 5 days a week at the 2 high schools, government high schools. Is it really for the police to be policing the school? Is that really a function for the police? My suggestion would be no, that's not for us. We do it. We are looking to see if there's a need to continue to do it, and we're working with the educators, the education department on that. But it's just areas like that tobacco legislation, everything that comes up, give it to the police. But we don't complain, we just get on because we're a can-do organization, but at some point, we need to recognize that perhaps there's no longer a need for us to do this, because we've been doing it since 1975. Why are we doing it in 2016? So it's just looking at everything that we do and looking at ways that we can reduce demand. Civil disputes, for instance, we attend to 80 to 100 civil disputes every single month. Most of those landlord and tenants. Why do we attend? To prevent a breach of the peace, because that could escalate from what is someone refusing to pay their rent to a landlord changing the locks, and next thing we've got a busted door, and next thing we've got someone assaulted. So to try to de-escalate that situation and prevent a breach of the peace, because we're in the business of preventing crime. That's the first and foremost our priority, is to make sure that an officer gets there to prevent any further breaches, so to speak. But do we necessarily need to attend 80 to 100 of those? The answer is no. We do it, but do we need to? No.
Okay. Both of you keep making reference, and you brought it up, so about this new commissioner who's coming in. But it seems that neither of you are wishing to be the new commissioner because you keep talking about this as a third person. Do either of you? Do you guys not want the job, or did you not apply?
Well, I did not apply. I'll make it clear. I did not apply for the Commissioner of Police. I applied for the Deputy Commissioner of Police. There's a bit of competition, I understand. I don't know who else applied for Deputy Commissioner of Police. I was interviewed. I went through the process. That is the normal process. And you know, fortunately for me, I came out and I'm successful in the application. So I did not apply for the commissioner. And my position officially starts the end of September.
Wendy was trying to get a question to me, but I'm just conscious that I'm on camera, so I didn't want to. Yeah. Well, you can put designate.
My contract officially says September 29th, so end of September.
Deputy Commissioner designate. Yeah. Well, it would be presumptuous of me to say, well, then, if I'm going to be the next commissioner, so maybe that's why. No, I'm going to answer your question, but I don't want that to become the story. And the simple answer is no, I did not apply.
Do you guys know anyone who has? Because we got the shortlist last time, but we haven't this time.
The governor's office is leading, and that's how I would direct those questions to the governor's office. You're welcome. Thanks. Any other questions? Well, Jackie, you're responsible for that. So. No, I'm not saying Jackie's responsible.
Yeah, did you want to
follow up a little bit on the drugs, because it was kind of an important question, because obviously today, I think a couple of days ago, Jackie put out a release about some teens getting arrested for a little bit of ganja. I'm just wondering how much, because you're talking about time, and you say that you've been focusing on traffickers and dealers rather than consumption, as you say, it is more of a health addiction issue. Mm-hmm. Does it help the RCIPS to have consumption as a crime, or hinder it?
Okay, I'll take that one. The laws are on the book, and I wouldn't say it's an hindrance, because at the same time, if you want to get someone into a treatment program, that's probably an avenue that you probably, or a vehicle that you can use to get them into a treatment program. And you know, with the drug court, if they go through a treatment program, there's no conviction recorded at the end of the day. So there needs to be some kind of incentive to get some people into the program. So it helps, and in certain professions you would still want to ensure that people are not using cannabis. Because, for example, if you're going to go through an operation, you would want to know that your doctor was just smoking some weed and going to do an operation on you. And same thing with police, you know, where we are involved in public safety. So, but it is for the legislators, but from a law enforcement perspective. And this is not to say that I'm impervious to where you want to go with that one, Wendy. Just following your articles and your readers. But it is something that I think we have to be cautious how we go down that route. It is something worth looking into. For example, now the government have decided that they will have medicinal marijuana. That is something I don't see an objection to. But I have also seen in my 30-odd years of policing, some young people being destroyed by the use of cannabis. So it's an health issue. Absolutely. We're a small country. We have a small infrastructure to deal with mental health issues right now. So I think we have to be cautious, and we need to look carefully at all the different studies and people who have gone down this route before we jump into it. But at the same time, you can have the laws, and you can have ways to make sure that at the end of the day, you're not necessarily criminalizing a young person, because at the end of the day, you don't want them to have a record, but you want to make sure that they don't become addicted to a drug that will that affects their future. If that helps. Okay, thanks. And thanks to gentlemen. I mentioned only gentlemen, and forgetting the gentleman at the back.